For 6 agonizing months, the feral cries of the Alpha King's twin pups had shredded the sanity of the Silverhorn Keep. With healers bleeding and nobles fleeing the stone halls, the pack hadn't known a single night of peace. Yet, the kingdom's ultimate salvation wouldn't be delivered by the blade of a high-born warrior, but rather by the quiet, unexpected arrival of Clementine. The grand fortress of Silverhorn Keep, nestled deep within the jagged peaks of the northern reaches, felt more like a tomb than a royal palace. Rain lashed against the towering, stained-glass windows, but the howling of the wind was nothing compared to the relentless, agonizing shrieks echoing from the royal nursery. King Cedric Montgomery, the most feared and respected alpha of his generation, stood in the corridor with his head pressed against the cold stone wall. His golden eyes, usually sharp and commanding, were hollowed out by months of sleep deprivation and absolute despair. His mate, Queen Rosalind, had perished giving birth to their sons, Elias and Leo. Since her final breath, the twin pups had been trapped in a terrifying state of half-shift, their tiny bodies caught in a primal frenzy. They possessed the claws and fangs of wolves, but the fragile, unformed minds of human infants. "Your Majesty, we must try the sedatives again," whispered Dr. Henry Arris, the pack's most esteemed physician. His white coat was stained with dried blood, not his own, but from the scratches he had endured trying to examine the heirs. Their heart rates are reaching critical levels. If they continue to thrash, their own adrenaline will stop their hearts. Cedric slammed his fist into the wall, cracking the ancient masonry. "You've sedated them every week, Henry. It does nothing but make them violently ill when they wake. There must be another way." But there was no other way. Every high-born nanny, every seasoned beta warrior, and every elite healer in the kingdom had tried and failed to soothe the twin pups. Lady Beatrice Sinclair, an arrogant alpha female who sought to become Cedric's new queen, had attempted to use her dominant aura to force the pups into submission just 3 days prior. She had walked out of the nursery with a torn silk dress and a deeply lacerated forearm, weeping in humiliation. The pups rejected everyone. They were feral, grieving, and entirely out of control. Down in the suffocating heat of the scullery, miles away from the royal drama, 21-year-old Clementine Hayes was on her hands and knees, scrubbing the hearth. Clementine was an Omega, and not the pampered, protected kind sung about in old pack ballads. She was the daughter of William Hayes, a disgraced debtor who had abandoned her to the keep's servitude to pay off his gambling debts. Her wolf was so dormant, so deeply suppressed by years of malnutrition and grueling labor, that she barely possessed a scent. To the rest of the pack, she was practically invisible. "Did you hear?" gossiped Mrs. Gable, the head housekeeper, as she passed by with an armful of fresh linens. "Lady Beatrice has hired a warlock from the Eastern Coven. Says it's a dark curse on the king's bloodline. They're going to perform an exorcism on the babes tonight." Clementine paused her scrubbing, her blistered hands aching in the soapy water. "A dark curse?" She frowned. Even as a lowly maid, she knew that was ridiculous. Pups didn't get cursed. They got sick. But no one asked the scullery maid for her medical opinion. She wiped a smudge of soot from her forehead, leaving a dark streak across her pale skin, and returned to the hearth. She was exhausted. Her body ached from carrying heavy loads of ironwood up the servants' stairs, and her rations consisted mostly of stale bread and whatever broth was left over from the guards' mess hall. Yet, despite her miserable existence, Clementine's heart ached for the king. More importantly, it ached for those babies. Every night, the wails of the twin pups drifted down the ventilation shafts, carrying a specific pitch of agony that made Clementine's chest tighten. It wasn't the sound of anger or dominance, as the noble alphas claimed. To Clementine's sensitive ears, it sounded like pure, unadulterated physical torment. "Heirs!" barked Thomas, the head guard of the lower levels, kicking her bucket. Dirty water sloshed over her patched dress. "Stop daydreaming. The fires in the upper west wing are dying out. The king is in a foul mood, and the keep is freezing. Haul a load of ironwood to the nursery corridor immediately." Clementine scrambled to her feet, bowing her head submissively. "Yes, sir." "Right away." She loaded a massive wicker basket with heavy logs, strapping the leather harnesses over her bruised shoulders. The climb to the high tower was punishing. With every step up the spiral stone staircase, the cries of the pups grew louder, sharper, and more desperate. By the time she reached the heavy oak doors of the nursery corridor, her lungs were burning, and her legs were trembling. She arrived to a scene of absolute chaos. The corridor was packed with the highest-ranking members of the court. Lady Beatrice was there, wearing a ridiculous velvet cloak, standing beside a hooded man smelling of sulphur and burnt sage, the rumoured warlock. King Cedric stood blocking the door to the nursery, his chest heaving, his claws fully extended, barring anyone from entering. "You will not touch my sons with that dark magic, Beatrice," Cedric roared, his alpha command shaking the very floorboards. Several nobles dropped to their knees, whimpering under the pressure of his aura. "Cedric, my king, please," Beatrice cried out, trying to look sympathetic, but failing to mask her ambition. "They are monsters right now. They are tearing themselves apart. If you do not let the warlock bind their wolves, they will die before sunrise." Inside the room, the pups shrieked. It was a terrifying, rattling sound. Clementine froze. The heavy basket of wood slipped from her grip, hitting the stone floor with a loud thud. The sharp sound of the dropping wood caused every head in the corridor to snap toward Clementine. The king's glowing golden eyes locked onto her, filled with a lethal mix of rage and protective instinct. "Who let a scullery rat up here?" hissed Lady Beatrice, stepping forward to slap Clementine across the face. "Get out of here, you filthy Omega!" Clementine stumbled back from the force of the blow, her cheek burning. She should have run. The survival instincts of an Omega were screaming at her to drop to the floor, bare her neck, and retreat to the shadows. But another wail ripped through the wooden door of the nursery, a sound so broken and fragile that Clementine's dormant wolf suddenly clawed at her chest, wide awake. She knew that cry. She had lived that cry. When Clementine was 5 years old, growing up in the impoverished outskirts of the territory, she had suffered from a condition the high-born wolves had long forgotten. Marrow burn. It was an excruciating affliction, where a pup's wolf tried to forcefully manifest before the human bones were fused. It happened when a pup was severely lacking a mother's unique scent gland enzymes, causing their internal temperature to skyrocket and their nerves to feel like they were submerged in boiling oil. Alphas never got it. Their robust genetics usually protected them. But these pups were motherless, highly potent alphas, whose bodies were warring against their own strength. They aren't feral, Clementine realized with a jolt of horror. They are burning alive from the inside out. "They have marrow burn," Clementine blurted out. Her voice was raspy from disuse, but it cut through the heavy silence of the corridor. King Cedric slowly turned his gaze back to her, stepping away from the nursery door. His massive frame towered over her, radiating a dangerous heat. "What did you say?" Marrow burn, Your Majesty," Clementine stammered, terrified but unable to stop herself. "Their bones. Their wolves are trying to shift, but their cartilage is too soft. The friction is causing nerve fire. The sedatives Dr. Aris is giving them are making it worse because it traps the heat inside their muscles." Dr. Arris scoffed loudly, stepping forward. Preposterous! Marrowburn is an old wives' tale, a peasant's excuse for weak bloodlines. My king, do not listen to this dirty peasant. She is raving. Guards, throw her in the dungeons, Lady Beatrice shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at Clementine. 2 large beta guards lunged forward, grabbing Clementine by her bruised arms. But as they yanked her backward, a sickening crack echoed from inside the nursery, followed by a wet, choking gasp. One of the pups had dislocated his own shoulder in his thrashing. Cedric's face drained of all colour. He looked entirely broken, a king reduced to a helpless father. "Let me help them," Clementine pleaded, fighting against the guard's grip with a sudden, uncharacteristic strength. "Please give me 3 minutes. If I am wrong, you can execute me yourself. But if I am right, I can save your heirs." Cedric stared into her wide, dirt-smudged face. He didn't see defiance. He saw absolute, terrifying certainty. "Release her," he commanded. "Cedric, you cannot be serious," Beatrice gasped. "Shut up, Beatrice," Cedric snarled, his voice a lethal whip that silenced the entire hall. He looked at Clementine, his eyes flashing silver. 3 minutes, Omega, or I will mount your head on the keep's gates." Clementine didn't hesitate. She shoved past the stunned nobles and pushed open the heavy oak doors. The nursery looked like a war zone. Curtains were shredded, wooden cribs were splintered into toothpicks, and the smell of blood and sour milk hung thick in the air. In the center of the room, on a massive rug, the twins were writhing. Elias and Leo were covered in a patchy mix of downy human hair and coarse wolf fur. Their eyes were rolled back in their heads, their tiny chests heaving frantically. They were burning up, their skin a terrifying shade of crimson. Clementine rushed to the large silver wash-basin in the corner of the room, which was filled with freezing water from the mountain springs. She grabbed 2 heavy woolen winter blankets from the ruined bed and plunged them directly into the icy water, soaking them completely. King Cedric, who had followed her inside, gasped. "What are you doing? They will freeze." "Heat feeds the marrow burn. We have to shock their nervous systems into resetting," Clementine shouted, completely forgetting she was speaking to the Alpha King. She hauled the heavy, freezing wet blankets out of the basin. Approaching the thrashing pups was dangerous. Leo snapped his tiny, razor-sharp jaws at her, catching her forearm and drawing a deep slice of blood. Clementine didn't even flinch. She ignored the pain, quickly grabbing Leo and wrapping him tightly in the freezing wet wool. She bound his arms and legs against his sides in a rigid, unforgiving swaddle, pinning him down. She immediately did the same to Elias. The shock of the freezing water caused the pups to shriek even louder for exactly 3 seconds. Cedric took a threatening step forward, a low growl rumbling in his chest, ready to rip Clementine away. But Clementine wasn't finished. She dropped to her knees between the 2 tightly bound, wet bundles. She placed one rough, blistered hand on Elias's chest and the other on Leo's. Then she closed her eyes and tapped into the deepest, most hidden part of her Omega nature. She began to purr. It wasn't a sound made with the vocal cords. It was a deep, guttural, rhythmic vibration that started in her chest and radiated down her arms. It was the ancestral, grounding frequency of an Omega mother, a biological metronome designed to regulate the erratic heartbeats of distressed pups. Simultaneously, she pressed her thumbs hard into a specific pressure point right behind the pups' ears, cutting off the sensory overload to their brains. Thump, 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 thump. The frequency filled the room, vibrating against the stone walls, cutting through the storm outside. Instantly, the struggling stopped. Cedric froze mid-step, his jaw dropping. The heavy, erratic panting of the twins began to slow, matching the exact rhythm of Clementine's vibrating purr. The terrifying crimson flush on their skin began to fade to a healthy, pale pink. The coarse wolf fur retreated, melting back into smooth baby skin. The freezing water had broken the fever, and the tight swaddle, combined with the omega frequency, tricked their panicked nervous systems into believing they were back inside a safe, secure womb. For the first time in 6 months, silence fell over the royal nursery. It wasn't the silence of exhaustion or sedation. It was the soft, rhythmic breathing of 2 healthy infant boys falling into a deep, natural, restorative sleep. Clementine kept her hands on their chests, her head bowed, her own breath coming in ragged gasps. Her arms ached, her bleeding arm throbbed, and she was dripping wet, but she didn't dare move. King Cedric slowly walked forward, his boots making no sound on the ruined carpet. He dropped to his knees beside Clementine, staring at his sons. Tears, real, hot tears, spilled over his dark lashes, tracking down his scarred cheeks. He reached out a trembling hand and brushed a wet curl from Elias's forehead. The baby sighed, nuzzling into the tight, wet blanket, perfectly content. Cedric turned his head to look at the scullery maid beside him. She was trembling, smelling of soot, cheap soap, and the metallic tang of her own blood. But beneath that, as her suppressed wolf finally flared to life to protect the pups, Cedric caught her true scent. It hit him like a physical blow to the chest. Wild honey, rain-soaked earth, and white jasmine. The king's golden eyes widened in absolute shock as the ancient, undeniable snap of the mating bond slammed into his soul, tethering the Alpha King of the North to the lowest servant in his castle. Before he could speak, the nursery doors burst open, and Lady Beatrice stormed in, followed by the guards. "What is this witchcraft?" she shrieked, shattering the peace. "Guards, take her!" "Silence!" Cedric roared, spinning around with a terrifying display of alpha dominance that sent Beatrice crashing to the floor in submission. He stood up, towering over the room, placing himself squarely between the door and the trembling Omega Maid. "If anyone," Cedric snarled, his voice vibrating with a lethal, possessive edge, "takes another step toward the future Queen of Silverhorn, I will tear their throat out with my teeth." The silence following King Cedric's declaration was absolute, broken only by the soft, rhythmic breathing of the sleeping twins. Lady Beatrice Sinclair scraped herself off the stone floor, her beautiful face distorted into a mask of twisted, ugly fury. She belonged to House Sinclair, a lineage backed by the vast wealth of the Sterling Syndicate, a private, ruthless consortium of aristocratic wolves who controlled the kingdom's northern trade routes. She had been groomed from birth to be queen. Being passed over for a dirt-smudged scullery maid was a slight that demanded blood. "You are mad," Beatrice whispered, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. "The grief has shattered your mind, Cedric. She is a peasant, a genetic dead end. The Sterling Syndicate will never recognize a rat as the queen of the northern reaches." Cedric didn't even blink. He kept his massive frame firmly planted between Beatrice and Clementine. "The Syndicate holds no power in my nursery, Beatrice, and if you ever speak to your queen in that tone again, I will strip House Sinclair of its titles and banish you to the wastelands. Get out!" Beatrice shot one last, venomous glare at Clementine before sweeping out of the room, Dr. Henry Aris scurrying nervously behind her like a frightened rat. Once the heavy oak doors clicked shut, the oppressive alpha aura radiating from Cedric softened instantly. He turned around, his broad shoulders dropping as he knelt back down beside Clementine. She was still shivering, completely soaked in freezing water, her arms wrapped protectively around the bundled pups. "You are bleeding," Cedric said softly. His voice, previously a weapon of mass destruction, was now a deep, soothing rumble. He reached out, gently taking her lacerated arm. The touch of his skin sent a jolt of pure electricity straight to Clementine's chest. The mating bond, suppressed for so long by her exhaustion, flared to life, singing in her veins. "It is nothing, Your Majesty," Clementine whispered, instinctively trying to pull her arm away, the ingrained submission of a servant, fighting against the pull of her mate. Leo was just frightened. He didn't mean it. "You will never call me Your Majesty again," Cedric murmured, pulling a silk handkerchief from his breast pocket and carefully binding her wound. "I am Cedric, and you are freezing. We need to get you out of those wet clothes." That night, Clementine's world turned upside down. She was not sent back to the drafty, soot-stained scullery. Instead, Cedric carried her himself, while 3 terrified handmaidens carried the sleeping twins into the grand royal chambers. She was bathed in hot water infused with lavender and rose oil, her blisters treated with expensive healing salves. When she emerged, wrapped in a robe of spun silver silk, a lavish feast was laid out before a roaring fireplace. Over the next 2 weeks, the Silverhorn Keep held its breath. The transformation in the twin pups was nothing short of miraculous. Bound to Clementine's presence, Elias and Leo thrived. The terrifying marrow burn never returned. They drank their milk, they laughed, and they slept soundly through the night, but only if Clementine was in the room. Her purr was the only medicine they needed. Cedric, too, was transforming. The hollow, haunted king was replaced by a fiercely protective, deeply attentive mate. Despite the agonizing pull of the mating bond, he did not force a physical claim on her. He understood the deep psychological scars left by her years of servitude. He courted his own mate, bringing her rare books from the keep's private library, walking with her in the enclosed glass gardens, and listening, truly listening, to her thoughts on pack politics. But outside the safety of the royal wing, treason was brewing. In the shadowy cellars beneath the eastern tower, Lady Beatrice met in secret with Dr. Aris and Lord Reginald Sterling, the head of the syndicate. "The pack is growing restless," Lord Sterling hissed, pouring himself a goblet of crimson wine. "The king refuses to hold court. He spends his days doting on a filthy Omega and her bastardized cure. The neighboring territories are laughing at us." "She is not just an Omega," Dr. Oris interrupted, wiping sweat from his brow. He unrolled an ancient, crumbling medical text onto the barrel between them. "I have been researching the symptoms she displayed. The resonant purr, the instantaneous regulation of alpha biology. It is not common Omega behavior. It is the signature of the Astor bloodline." Beatrice frowned. "The Astors? That is a myth. The prime Omegas were wiped out centuries ago." "Evidently not," Aris replied grimly. "Prime Omegas are the only creatures biologically capable of dominating an alpha without violence. If she fully awakens and completes the mating bond with Cedric, her pheromones will override all political loyalties in this pack. The warriors will bow to her by pure instinct. House Sinclair will be entirely powerless." Beatrice's eyes narrowed into slits of pure ice. "Then we must ensure she never awakens, and we must ensure the king believes she is the monster." She turned to the physician. "Dr. Aris, do you still have access to the royal kitchens?" "Yes, my lady," he stammered. "Good. Find a way to slip Wolfsbane and Nightshade into the pup's evening milk," Beatrice ordered, her voice devoid of any humanity. "Make it a slow-acting dose. When the pups begin to seize, we will claim the Omega's impure nature is poisoning them. The king will be forced to execute her to save his heirs." The night of the blood moon arrived, casting an eerie crimson glow through the high stained glass windows of the keep. The atmosphere in the castle was suffocatingly tense. Earlier that evening, Lord Stirling had manufactured a brilliant distraction. He sent a frantic messenger to the royal wing, claiming that rogue wolves had breached the southern border near the Blackwood estate, a vital agricultural holding that supplied the keep's winter food. Cedric, bound by his duty as Alpha King, was forced to ride out with his elite guard, leaving Clementine alone in the nursery with the twins. "I will be back before the moon sets," Cedric had promised, kissing her forehead gently before he left. "Lock the doors. Trust no one but your own instincts." Now, Clementine sat by the grand crib, rocking gently. The twins were fussy, crying softly as they awaited their evening feeding. A young beta maid from the kitchens knocked timidly and entered, carrying a silver tray with 2 crystal bottles of warmed goat's milk. "From Dr. Heirs, my lady," the maid whispered, bowing low before practically running out of the room. Clementine picked up one of the bottles. It was warm, perfectly prepared. But as she brought the nipple close to Elias's mouth, her newly awakened omega senses violently flared. Beneath the creamy scent of the milk, there was a faint, sharp odor. It smelled like bitter almonds and crushed iron, nightshade and wolfsbane. A primal snarl ripped from Clementine's throat. She violently threw the bottle against the stone wall. It shattered, the poisoned milk hissing as it hit the cold floor. Before she could process the betrayal, the nursery doors were forcefully kicked open. Lady Beatrice strode in, flanked by Dr. Heirs and 4 heavily armed rogue mercenaries bearing the crest of the Stirling Syndicate. "What a pity," Beatrice sneered, stepping over the shattered glass. "I had hoped they would drink it. It would have been a much quieter death. But I suppose we will just have to do this the messy way." Clementine backed up, pressing her body against the crib, shielding Elias and Leo. Her heart hammered against her ribs, not with fear, but with an ancient, explosive fury. "You would murder innocent pups just to wear a crown," she growled. "I am saving this bloodline from being polluted by a peasant," Beatrice stated coldly. She nodded to the mercenaries. "Hold her down. Heirs, force the rest of the milk down the pups' throats." As the mercenaries lunged forward, something inside Clementine snapped. The years of abuse, the starvation, the endless scrubbing of stone floors, the humiliation, all of it acted as kindling for the dormant beast within her. But it was the threat to her pups that provided the spark. A sound unlike anything the keep had ever heard erupted from Clementine's chest. It was a roar, but not the deep, aggressive roar of an alpha. It was a piercing, harmonic, terrifying battle cry of a prime omega defending her young. The sheer sonic force of it shattered the remaining stained glass windows, raining crimson glass down upon the room. In a flash of blinding white light, Clementine didn't just fight. She shifted. Where the fragile, bruised scullery maid had stood, a massive, magnificent wolf now crouched. Her fur was the color of fresh snow, glowing with an ethereal, almost radioactive light. She was nearly as large as Cedric's alpha form, her eyes blazing with a terrifying, ancient power. The Astor bloodline had not died out. It had simply been waiting for a king worthy of its protection. The mercenaries froze in absolute terror. Dr. Heirs dropped the second bottle of milk, falling to his knees and weeping as the overwhelming, domineering aura of the prime omega crushed his lungs. Even Beatrice stumbled backward, her arrogant facade crumbling into pure, unadulterated panic. Clementine lunged. She didn't kill them. She was an omega, a creator of life, not a mindless butcher. But she was ruthless. She pinned the largest mercenary to the ground with a single swipe of her massive paw, shattering his collarbone. She snapped her jaws inches from Dr. Oris's face, causing the physician to faint dead away from the sheer terror of her presence. Beatrice scrambled toward the door, screaming for help. She threw open the heavy oak doors and ran straight into a solid wall of muscle and fur. King Cedric had returned. He had smelled the deception the moment he reached the Blackwood estate and rode his war-horse to death to get back to the keep. He stood in the doorway, in his half-shifted form, his claws dripping with the rain from the storm outside, his golden eyes taking in the scene, the shattered poison, the terrified mercenaries, the treacherous physician, and his beautiful, magnificent mate standing guard over his sons. Cedric grabbed Beatrice by the throat, lifting her effortlessly off the floor. "You are stripped of your titles, your wealth, and your pack," he snarled, his voice echoing through the entire castle. "The Sterling Syndicate will be burned to the ground by dawn. Throw them in the deepest cells," he roared to his guards, who had just rushed up the stairs behind him. As the traitors were dragged away screaming, Cedric stepped into the ruined nursery. He shifted back into his human form, ignoring the glass crunching beneath his boots. Clementine, too, shifted back. She collapsed to her knees, the adrenaline leaving her body in a sudden rush. She was panting, naked and trembling. Cedric dropped to the floor instantly, pulling his heavy fur cloak from his shoulders and wrapping it tightly around her. He pulled her into his chest, burying his face in her neck, inhaling the intoxicating scent of wild honey, rain-soaked earth, and white jasmine. "You saved them," Cedric choked out, tears mixing with the rain on his face. "You saved us all, my beautiful queen." Clementine leaned into his embrace, the last remnants of her fear melting away. She looked up into the golden eyes of her alpha, finally allowing the mating bond to snap fully into place, fusing their souls together. "They are my pups, Cedric," she whispered fiercely, "and no one will ever hurt them again." The Silverhorn Keep never echoed with cries of pain again. Clementine transformed the royal court, ruling not with an iron fist, but with the unyielding strength of a prime Omega's heart. Elias and Leo grew into formidable, balanced alphas, a testament to the scullery maid who saved them. King Cedric finally found his peace, forever tethered to the woman who carried the scent of rain, honey, and salvation.